My mother would get beaten until she bleeds, and it was so bad for me to try to understand why is my father doing that to the woman he says he loves. I was a young person, but already it started to affect me so much that I became too close in myself. People would say I'm shy, but it wasn't shyness. It was I had so many issues within me.
We had the first signal of gunshot. Something like pow. So, and being a refugee, we already know when you hear those things, it's frightening because you know exactly how you came and what made you come. Those who attempted to run away from the line could be, they just shot them, and you see them fighting for life, you know. The kids made me more confused and confounded because one was with me here, the other one holding me, so I could either walk, neither fight for their mothers. They asked her out of the line, she held my shirt, and the guy who came with the gun just stamped the hand, you know, telling. In fact, he told me if I don't leave the woman, I was going to be shot dead. So I just told her, okay, mommy, let God take control. You can go. She, among many others, were raped.
My mother would, ask my father, where are you coming from? Because you're coming late. And, my father would say, hey, you are a woman. She'd keep quiet. I'm a man in this house. He would take my mother's head, hit against the wall. My father will use any tool to beat me. He will use. One day he even came with a machete in my panga and saying, I can cut you. You are ugly like your mother. My father chased my mother away, and then immediately the same night, when my mother left, like the difference of 30 minutes, my father brought another woman. I started saying, I will kill you. I started saying, I'm going to take a gun. I'm going to join rebel movement. I will come. I will shoot you.
My son Barry died in his early 20s, quite a few years ago now. He would have been 33, I think. It was an age when ARVs were not available. I really had to deal with a lot of pain because I was living out here in Africa and he had gone back to UK. When my first marriage broke down with his mum. While I knew he was ill, I don't think that I myself engaged myself with how ill he was. And it was certainly a great surprise to me when I got the phone call one night to say that he had died.
You would just find that now you've started your menstruation, and when you come from the bush after 2 weeks with the old people being told how to look after yourself and all these things, you go back home, you are already being told this is going to be your husband. He would come with his cigarette and put off his cigarette on my nose, and then my daughter started to cry. So he just went with his back hand towards the child. Boom. I could tolerate that physical violence. The emotional violence killed me. Wearing a night dress, I ran out and I ran.
When the conflict came, my father, took different direction with his wife, who's my stepmother, and I, with my two sisters, we took the different directions to DRC. Myself and my sister, the difference is 1 year. So she was 10, and then 10-year-old girl, she knew nothing. I was innocent. I didn't know anything, and so in front of everybody, and They started raping my sister. They beat me, they tied me up, and she was bleeding. What are we doing here? We'd rather go back in Burundi, going to die there. We don't have fathers, we don't have mother, we don't have anyone who cares for us. Why were we born? What have we done? All those kind of questions.
A lot of my guilt was, how could I not have appreciated the crisis that my own son was in? Maybe I have been too busy getting on with my own life. And to be honest, some of the guilt was, there I was saying for the last 6 months of his life, I can't raise money for an airfare to go and see him. Well, I tell you, within 24 hours of learning of his death, I had raised enough money for an airfare to go to his funeral.
The kind of military exposure that faced me made me to feel defeated, because if I cannot help myself, I can hardly help anybody, because I was very vulnerable. I could be killed. I was beaten by the gun butt, all kind of humiliations. The children, retroactively, they in turn lost hope in me, because under all costs, I'm the last person to protect them. I felt it would be better, even if I could die. Perhaps that would have taken care of all my problems.
Where did we start? Did we start Cairo in '94 when you had the need to put, male involvement was put in the program of action that came out of that 100 and X countries signed on to, and then slowly advocates, mostly women's rights advocates, were leading the charge saying, we need to get men in the door here. Out of that, there was a slow growth in project work. So condom promotion work here, vasectomy work here, let's try to get men involved in maternal and child health over here, but it didn't yet have its political edge. Having discussions with women's rights advocates in Brazil, we said, okay, we can enact a law that makes violence against women illegal. And we can try to figure out what we do with men so that we end the impunity. But we don't have space in jail to put aside or to lock up 26% of Brazilian men. You guys, you men, who say you're allies with the women's rights movement, go out there and figure out what to do with men.
Uganda was a pioneer story in bringing down the prevalence rate of infection from 30% in the 1990s to 6.7 that we have now. That was a big success story, because Uganda was the first country where the president came out and said we have HIV/AIDS. So we broke the stigma cycle long ago. The rate of infection has stagnated. People have become complacent. There's still the gender disparities which were there are still there, or in the increase. There's still this gender dynamics where women are still taken as the lower being in Uganda. So one of the drivers of the epidemic is gender-based domestic violence, and many women are not empowered to come out and say, these are my rights.
Many people don't like to see women abused, but they don't have the courage to stop it. So when they see somebody with the courage to stop it and take a public stand, they admire it. The silent people start showing their appreciation for this new kind of leadership. Even if 50% of the population is perpetrators, 50% of the population is not a perpetrator. But the fact that the 50% who perpetrate violence have immunity and do so with impunity is because the rest of the society is silent, and through that silence endorse the violence. So what we felt is, let us first work with those who perhaps in their silence are unknowingly or unwittingly endorsing violence.
It's not do you do gender transformation or do you do AIDS prevention, that you can't do AIDS prevention well and completely enough unless you do gender transformation. You can offer condoms, but unless men reflect about their bodies, about power, about acknowledging the humanity, the personhood of women or their sexual partners, whichever sex they are, about going to get testing, which isn't about, there's not a technological solution that we're going to put a chip in men's head and they're going to go get tested. It is about changing their norms about how they see their bodies, about how they see themselves in public, about how they see other men and whether they see other men as judging them, etc. You got to deal with gender transformation even to do AIDS well.
Through my years, my very many years of work in the field, and especially focusing on sexual and gender-based violence, I see that the policies that we've had have not necessarily been effective. We've got lots of work done, guidelines, lots of training, lots of women empowerment programs, lots of great programs targeted at the girl child, but really we have seen increase in violence against girls and women.
Even on the pump, people were fighting. Men will just come in here and say, just don't get ahead and take the bucket and say, clear out, I should get the water first.
Particular week when there was a lot of rape of, I believe about 7 very young girls had been raped in different camps. It didn't matter how much you told women that it's their right not to be raped, it's their right not to do this, and as long as that message does not make sense to the man, I don't think that we get very far.
I was very hostile, very aggressive. Every day for me it looked like months.
And then I thought, forget about these books and these guidelines. They're not working for me. I'm going to the camp to speak to the people. And I went and I called a few refugees who were working with us, different volunteers and who were working with different organizations. And I said, what's going on? Let's talk. And they started to say, because of war and so on and so forth. And I said, no, that doesn't work. I see people who have undergone a lot of suffering, but that does not necessarily change their humanity.
You will talk and talk and say, okay, and if I see you want to bother me, I say, give me a chance, I will get back to you. I'm not interested, you can go your way. But these are professionals. From your responses, they know the kind of thing you pass through.
I realized that men and boys had the key. And we sat down and strategized how we were going to embrace men and how we were going to talk about, first of all, the implications of rape, the implications of violence, the implications the consequences not only to the victims, but also to the men themselves and to their self-esteem and to the community.
Fortunately, when I discovered that, yes, these are situations, and it's not only applicable to me, but many others, we started to make what we call allies. Those people with similar experience, they organized, once somebody came, I don't know his name, he organized a forum where we'll have people with horrible stories, maybe not too many, 2, 3, 4 of you will sit down and explain your story. Then when somebody else explain his or hers, then you will see that perhaps you are a bit considerate. But because you will see people with scabs who were wounded, you will see people with bullet holes who were received and treated in hospital. So you started to compare to see that, if mine happened this way, I think comparatively I'm 1 point ahead.
And at that point, I relaxed. Because actually what they were suggesting, what they were proposing, was exactly what needed to be done.
All men were branded as bad men because of rape, because of this. But there were also men who had peaceful home who equally suffered because of what happened. So the way to turn the story around was, we should think with our experiences to get a group, start to talk with them, our colleague men, and start to go out and campaign. It was a very hard job because at that time, what people wanted to listen to was food assistance, relief.
And we started to organize trainings, actually.
Give civic education exercise on the need for gender equality and empowerment of women in society. If you cannot beat your mother, neither your elder sister or auntie who educated you, who made you what you are, then the next one you are beating, you are violating is somebody else's auntie.
Men started coming and saying, now I can have a conversation with my wife. Now my wife appreciates me much better. I'm very happy to go home. Last night when my neighbor was having a problem with the wife, I went and I intervened.
Your two-track approach. You are not only doing it because it's actually necessary, but it's also a reconciliation process for you yourself to work over your wounds, your psychological wounds.
They started to grow bit by bit, went and rented a one-roomed house with my children with me, but doing all kinds of jobs You call me to do your garden, I would do your garden. You call me to do your house, I would do your house. You call me to do your washing and ironing, I would do that. When the test came, then they told me, no, your daughter has got AIDS. I think that killed me to say, now I lost this one 6 months ago. Now I've got this one. She's dying again. I was not even thinking about myself. And I was saying, oh, maybe I've got a bad omen. I was married to a very abusive man, and then this is what happened. I left him, and now I married a very wonderful man. Now this is what is happening to me, and now I'm going to lose 2 children. I was not even concerned about myself, about AIDS, knowing that once my daughter has got AIDS, it means also I've got AIDS. I am not that very educated, but I had to do something when I saw how women were suffering, especially women living with HIV. And also coming from a background of violence where I experienced it both physically and emotionally, I said I'm going to stand my ground and I'm going to take action and do something.
I was a photojournalist for many years, and a photojournalist working for international agencies, Oxfam, IUCN, UN agencies, etc. And what I noticed was that they would all say to me when I was doing photo essays, bring us back photographs of women and children. You know, that's what is going to sell in any campaign that we're doing, in any publicity that we're doing. And it was as though men had disappeared from the development scene. Men are not seen as not just part of the solution to the problems that we face in development, but an actual obstacle. Last year I was honoured to win an award on gender imaging, you know, in Southern Africa. That people could say, look, Trevor is genuinely transforming the landscape of imagery around gender in our region. And it's bringing men back into the proper role that they have in development as partners with women and children.
My psychosocial support groups, they extend to all over the regions. So there's a group which meets on that day, and we did not inform this group. We just went, and when we arrived with parliamentarians, we saw a group of 8 women with their little babies there, with their medication, little bottles of medication and the ARVs, seated on the ground, on the dirt, taking the soil, drinking one medicine, chewing the soil, drinking water, because they didn't have food. And I said to myself, this is a blessing in disguise that it's happening. It's hard, but it's happening so that they can see what is happening to people living with HIV. This one member of parliament, Honorable Hetse, he said, Jennifer, I'm going to, please give me the men's organization in Namibia, because I'm going to be the first parliamentarians to work with men so that we start to have men's groups.
It was so pleasing to us to find that men started coming up and saying they want to be part of Mama's Club. But they wanted to meet on their own to begin with. So we said, okay, it's fine. They said we want to first of all sit together as men and discuss our own issues. And then we work with the mothers. We don't mind being training with the mothers. We don't mind doing community sensitization with the mothers, but we have our own issues which concern us. What they want to do is exactly what the mothers want to do. The same things, go out in the community and sensitize other men. So we're thinking that these are the men who are going out to say, hey, it's okay to be HIV positive. It's okay to test and find you have a result, and you can still live if you take treatment.
We also have a challenge in Namibia of men going for HIV testing. This one went because of our outreach which we were having with them. He came to me to seek advice. He said, I've tested positive, and because now I understand what it means, I need to also inform my girlfriend. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to ask her to go for testing. So I said, that's a very good idea. But if it was before, when we started doing, do you think he was going to tell his girlfriend? No. He was just going to keep it secret and carry on sleeping without protection. So he went and told the girlfriend in consultation with me. I was behind him. They went together for testing, and he told his girlfriend, I tested positive. So the girlfriend went, tested, she was negative. And then the girlfriend said, because of your honesty, I'm not going to leave you.
When I was working in the Liberian refugee camps in Sierra Leone, the same problems, we were faced with the same problems, gender-based violence problems. But because I had a few returnees who were in the refugee camps that I had worked with, I looked for them. So I looked for David and his friends, and they came again, and they helped to train, they helped to orientate the community, the Liberian refugee community in Sierra Leone, and again they formed a movement there. What is very interesting is that after the Liberian refugees went back home, David and his friends continued and expanded this movement into a national movement in Sierra Leone, and that is what they are doing now.
You know what one older man said? Thank you very much. You should come often to our communities and invite as many men as possible, because when I came here in the morning, when I was told that I should come and attend this, because they are saying men should also come, I was just saying, okay, because my wife is saying I must come, and the counselor also was encouraging us, but I didn't want to come. But when I came here, I was a blind man. Now I'm going back home as a man who can see.
There's a Mongolian men's union doing work with men on alcoholism, looking at sort of alcoholism in the post-Soviet state and economic depression and all of that. Rwanda Men's Network coming out of that. A lot of guys who were in exile for many years and came back and were part of the first wave of rebuilding their country and saying, we've got to do some things differently here, and part of that has to be how we question men. There's also a Cambodian Men's Union, that post-conflict setting. Who would have thought that Mexico would be such a motor for so much work around men and masculinities? I mean, the place where the word machismo was invented, Texas. Place where I grew up. There's some groups of men engaging, organizing around fatherhood and such, and they're not the father's rights backlash group.
The father of the family tends to be this self-controlling, dominant, patriarchal model of fatherhood. That's the model that I want to change.
I don't care how traditional, how educated the man is, it seemed to always come down that that's not what he really, really wants. When he looks into himself, he say, I really would love it if my children smile at me and greet me, and that they're not afraid of me, and that my wife is not afraid of me. But again, like I say, many of them say, I don't know any other way of doing it. And even though I might have felt it was wrong, I was afraid to do it differently because of the names that I would be called and because of my culture and my tradition.
If I start the discourse from fatherhood, the raising of our children, how we can do better as men in that fatherhood role.
That is one place where I hear over and over again where the shift begins to happen. That, I see.
A lot of men will discuss that at length with me, and then I can raise the other issues. There I am sitting in my middle-class suburb in Harare, starting the African Fathers Initiative, and 20 kilometers down the road, unbeknown to me, there's a group of poor black guys in Chitangwiza starting the Fatherhood Peace Project. They've got 50 members in the group now. They've got 5 counsellors working with them, women as well. They have an orphanage that they're working with. Don't see this as a middle-class, namby-pamby liberal thing.
I read a lot of liberation theology. I read a lot of feminist theology. And I found clear challenges from those disciplines, where as a man I was saying there's no way I can be religious and at the same time find myself associating with structures that are oppressive, with the images of manhood that are oppressive to women and that are abusive to women. We use a lot of analysis that has already been developed by women's organizations, particularly feminists, and we try and listen to that conversation that has been happening over many years involving feminists and say, what can women teach us? In our work, there was a time when we had a belief that we were doing this work as men on behalf of women. We're doing this work for women, but more and more we are beginning to discover that we are actually doing this work for ourselves. It is a liberating experience.
The whole men, what about us thing that really started around HIV and AIDS, led by UNAIDS, probably in 1996. On the 1st of December every year is World AIDS Day, and every year UNAIDS used to manage the World AIDS campaign. The theme was men make a difference, and to a large extent the thinking that we are stuck in now, which is really fundamentally, it's instrumentalist. It's like we want equality because we want to deal with HIV and AIDS, because we want to stop violence against, not we want equality because that's what we believe. There's these amazing things that are happening in pockets, but it's local, it's contained, it's small, and we must scale up. If we scale up something that is based on a faulty analysis that doesn't look at the root causes of the power, we're scaling up harm. If the problem is patriarchy and multiple layers of power and privilege around race and so on, class and so on, then if this is a movement, then it will address the root causes.
Women fight so hard to have a seat at the table. Women fight so hard to get resources. Women's rights organizations are persistently underfunded. Well, what do you do as women's rights advocates, as positive women's groups, what have you, now that working with men and boys for gender equality seems to be the flavor of the month and seems to be where the donors want to put the money, and it seems to be where the media attention is and the momentum. It seems to be kind of the politically correct thing to say, that working with men and boys is good and we have to do it. And I think that clouds our opportunity to wrestle with the tougher issues of where our agendas and where our priorities as women's rights advocates and as men who work with men differ and butt heads. We need to have an honest conversation. And before we can have an honest conversation, we can't get a shared vision. There are women's organizations who are now using the buzz term of working with men for gender equity or engaging men and boys. Part of that is in principle of recognizing that this work, gender is that addressing gender transformation does have to happen between men and women. There probably is a considerable number of organizations who are saying, okay, well, let's get on this bandwagon.
One of our principles, our founding principles, is women shall lead. Full stop. Okay, what about men? What about men? Men are really important. Men, for all the reasons that people are saying and other reasons, but men will engage in the campaign as human beings who want to be in solidarity with the oppressed. In this case, it's women's leadership. They want to build it. They want to make way for it.
Who has got powers here? Even if we look at governments, who has got the power? Most of it's males. So if we want to do like we are competing and fighting, we are not going to win any battles at all. It's better to come together and come to a common understanding.
Why are men going to give up privilege? I think a couple of ways. One is there's some of it that there's no choice. I mean, we enact laws, we have human rights, and you can't say, we have to wait for you to change your mind.
Patriarchy is changing. I think it's weakening anyway. It's weakening because less men are working. It's weakening because more men are in poverty.
There's a generation of boys that are saying, wait a minute, the girl's right here next to me in math. She's right next to me here in my reading class. There's a shift when that begins to happen, to say, wait a minute, my mom's working outside the home and the world didn't fall apart. Many men, particularly in the global south, and even low-income men in the global north, don't experience their lives as being full of power or being powerful. In fact, most of the time they go with their head down and they're worried about the power that other men have over them, to either use violence, to take their job away from them, to offer them a job. The kind of power that some men have is not the power that all men have.
Increasing numbers of men see patriarchy as a prison that they themselves live in. And they want to find the key to the door on that.
We drive too fast, we drink too much, we smoke too much, we don't take care of our bodies enough, we only go to healthcare when something has fallen off, we don't use condoms, we're dying earlier, and we kill each other, either from suicide or we kill other men. We're killing each other, not for anything that's biological, but because of the way we raise boys.
When you fall short of certain things, you should accept that yes, you are at fault and you've made some mistakes, but you want to make a change for the better. Then from there you can proceed.
I changed because I didn't born holy. I didn't grow up, in the family where it educated me to be a nice person.
The war situation really exposed me to much greater things, and even the degree of reasoning.
It takes a long time to master a new language. What we're talking about is mastering new ways of being with each other.
We knew we had made a mistake as men in our society. We know the culture had a lot of impunities that really kept women aside.
We need a fatherhood revolution, recognizing that if our relationships as adults break down, we've still got a responsibility to those children that are born from us.
My wife, my sister, my mother, my cousin, my schoolmate, my college mate, my other colleagues will say, no, David, let's look at it from the other perspective. No, let's look at it this way. Let's put the cards on the table and sort them. With that kind of contribution, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to make such a terrible mistake that led the country into war.
Those things led me to say, I will strive all my life to make sure that I do something good to my mother, because and my mothers and sisters, to myself, because I have been abused, and then by doing something is to see how I can speak about it, starting with my father.
It's a long, bumpy, dusty and road to ply through, but we are on our initial steps making the way to justice.
We come and we observe and we participate with hope.
Even in the areas like Kailahun, Sonke, Kwenadugu, that is Kabbalah area, where initially they could not allow any woman to hold major position. We have up to 4, 5, 10, 12 district councillors who are all female.
From maybe a fringe idea or of a project-based idea to saying this has to be about a movement. We've got to figure out how to enhance what we do at the community level with grassroots work, but it's got to be made political, it's got to be taken into policy, it's got to be taken out through the media and through the public imagination about what men and women's lives are about, and it's got to be intimately connected to the overriding social injustices.
For the first time in the history of Sierra Leone, we have established the 3 Gender Act that protected women, the Customary Marriage and Divorce Act, the devolution of estate and property inheritance right, then registration of all customary marriages and all the rest of it, and Domestic Violence Act.
Being good, being yourself, not using violence, because that was where I come from.
I think things are changing. The world is changing.
My actual focus is to change the mindset of men, the way we look at things, the way we do things. And let us know that this planet Earth and Sierra Leone and Africa and the world at large is not just built for men alone.